Hello, welcome to my channel, another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I'm here with my Week 12 update for the Read What You Own Platinum Challenge, where I have challenged myself to read 100 books that I already own before I can buy another book. There are some exceptions, and this challenge will eventually morph into the more difficult 500 book challenge when I am done. But what have I read for this week? The first book I finished was number 57, an audiobook of American Dirt by Jeanine Cummins. This is a book that had a lot of controversy when it was first published. The author is essentially a Caucasian female with a Puerto Rican grandparent. But the novel is about Mexican and South American immigrants making their way from Mexico to the border of the United States, where they plan to cross the border illegally. And a lot of Latino authors got a little upset that this author got somewhere in the neighborhoods of, I believe, $1 million for her novel. They said, why can't a Latino author get $1 million to write about immigrants in Mexico? Well, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of who got paid and why they got paid. What I can say is that I was expecting a literary novel, and what I got was a thriller. This author, Jeanine Cummins, has watched a few too many Hollywood movies for this to be anything other than just a run-of-the-mill thriller. It was okay. I enjoyed it, sort of. But it was very plain, very ordinary. You can imagine them making this into a movie, because I think that's how the author envisioned this book when she was writing. She saw a movie in her head, and she was writing the story to that. And I have to take a few points off for that. I think this story could have very well been told much better by a Mexican, dealing with immigrants themselves or what they know, instead of this Caucasian American woman. It's okay, I said, nothing special. After that, I read Stella Morris. This is the second half of McCarthy's two novels that he just recently published, the other being The Passenger. This novel does not stand on its own. You absolutely, positively, definitely need to read The Passenger first. This is a coda to The Passenger, and it is a story told entirely in dialogue of character Alicia and her psychologist in a mental institution. And it's their conversation back and forth. They have lots of interesting topics, sort of, but it's also very pretentious. It's the author trying to show how smart he is and how clever the reader could be if they can suss out all the clues of what he is talking about. I think this is one of McCarthy's weakest books. The only two weaker I would put down as No Country for Old Men and The Road. You might like this if you like really digging deep into author details and meanings. Next book that I read was a digital book, and it is sort of a follow-up to American Dirt. This is Tell Me How It Ends, an essay in 40 questions by Valeria Luiselli. And this is sort of an interesting book. Parts of it were written originally in English, and parts were originally written in Spanish, and someone translated the Spanish into English. So reading this book, I did not know what was originally Spanish or what was English. But the author is a Mexican woman living in New York City, going through immigration legally. At the time she was writing this, she was still waiting for her green card so she could work legally. But she had a temporary work visa, and she was working as a translator for the New York courts, dealing with illegal immigrant children who came without their parents. And the stories that she tells is much more resonant and much more authentic than anything that American Dirt was or aspired to be. She is the real thing. These are the real stories. In a epilogue to the book, she mentions that one of the main stories she told about an immigrant boy, that the boy wanted her to use his real name in the book. But it was eventually decided that because he still was in the United States illegally, going through this whole process in the courts to try to gain a status where he could stay, they decided to use a fictional name, and I believe change some of the details around. Okay, I can understand that. But that was a book that got me thinking much more clearly about how cruel the United States is to its illegal immigrants and how we could be much kinder and more humane to them. Sorry if that got too political for some people. The next book that I finished was an audiobook, and that was Stormbringer by Michael Moorcock. This is the sixth and sort of final book in his Elric saga, and it is freaking fantastic. It is either the best book of the series or the second to the best. The only other challenger, I think, is the first, Elric Melderbonnet. It's hard for me to pick which one is better. But this brings the story to a very clear and definitive end. And it is just a super exciting book to read. Now, I say sort of the end of the series because Michael Moorcock has continued the series after he finished it. I'm not sure where he's going to go with that. The collection that I read, this audiobook, contains another book that he finished after the series, but that was a story before the end of Stormbringer. So that sort of fit in. I think some of the continuation of the series has some sort of way it continues after the end of Stormbringer. If you've read that novel, you know there is a very clear end to the Elric saga. I'm not sure I'm going to finish the later stories of the Elric saga because I really like the first ones. And sometimes enough is enough. And Stormbringer packs a powerful punch, and I am satisfied with that saga. The next book I read, which was 61, is The Living Shadow by Maxwell Grant. This is the first in a very long, pulpy series about a man named The Shadow, who was a crime fighter. Only, in this first book in the series, the Shadow is sort of a shadowy figure in the background. You only get glimpses of the real man controlling everyone else to do his bidding, to fight crime. There's a man named Vincent who was going to jump off a bridge and kill himself. But the Shadow convinced Vincent to work for him instead. And so Vincent has to bring down a gang of gem thieves. And it is an exciting pulp adventure. I want to continue. There are more than 300 books that were eventually written for The Shadow. Unfortunately, only like 25 of them are legally available to most people because of a copyright dispute. It just so happens that when The Shadow, all 300 of them were in public domain, I snagged them legally. So I can read all 300 if I want to. I think I would lose interest before I got to the end of 300. But there are some people out there who may read all 300 if they can get their hands on them. The last book that I read was a play by Moliere, The Bungler. This is 17th century comedic French drama. And something is lost in the translation and over the ages. This is what came out. I have a description. This is a neutrino book. Now, a neutrino is a subatomic particle that rarely interacts with matter. And that's how I feel about this book. I read it, but it did not interact with me at all. I can sort of remember the plot, even though I read it just yesterday, but a neutrino passes through matter and doesn't leave an impression or result. And that's what reading this play was like. I can tell you the rough story. There is a Frenchman who's in love with a young woman who is the slave of another man, but this is not American slavery. This is like 17th century version of slavery. And he loves her, and another man loves her. And there's all this interaction between the two, and the main character is Lali, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, creates all these interesting schemes to try to dissuade this other man away from his lady love. And he bungles it all until someone else rescues him. It's important to revisit these old works, but again, neutrino, no real effect on me whatsoever. So that is what I read last week. Thank you for watching, and keep on reading.